Blondie singing "The Tide is High." This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. You are what you eat, or so the saying goes. In American culture, healthy food is a national preoccupation. But then why are Americans becoming less healthy and more overweight? Acclaimed author and journalist Michael Pollan argues that what most Americans are consuming today is not food, but edible food-like substances. Michael Pollan is professor of science and environmental journalism at University of California, Berkeley. His previous book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, was named one of the 10 best books of 2006 by the New York Times and Washington Post. His latest book is called In Defense of Food, An Eater's Manifesto. Michael Pollan recently joined me here in the Firehouse studio for a wide-ranging conversation about nutrition, food science, and the current American diet. I began by asking him why he feels he has to defend food.
Food's under attack from two quarters. It's under attack from the food industry, which is taking, perfectly good whole foods and tricking them up into highly processed edible food-like substances, and from nutritional science, which has over the years convinced us that we shouldn't be paying attention to food. It's really the nutrients that matter. And they're trying to replace foods with antioxidants, cholesterol, saturated fat, omega-3s, and that whole way of looking at food as a collection of nutrients, I think, is very destructive.
Shouldn't people be concerned, for example, about cholesterol?
No. Cholesterol in the diet is actually only very mildly related to cholesterol in the blood. That was a scientific error, basically. We were sold a bill of goods that we should really worry about the cholesterol in our food, basically because cholesterol is one of the few things we could measure that was linked to heart disease. So there was this kind of obsessive focus on cholesterol. But, the egg has been rehabilitated. The egg is very high in cholesterol, and now we're told it's actually a perfectly good, healthy food. There's only a very tangential relationship between the cholesterol you eat and the cholesterol levels in your blood.
How is it that the food we eat now, it takes time to read the ingredients?
Yeah.
You actually have to stop and spend time and perhaps put on glasses or figure out how to pronounce words you've never heard of.
Yeah, it's a literary scientific experience now, going shopping in the supermarket, because basically the food has gotten more complex. It's for the food industry, you see, to understand the economics of the food industry, you can't really make money selling things like, oatmeal, plain rolled oats. And if you go to the store, you can buy a pound of oats, organic oats, for 79 cents. There's no money in that because it doesn't have any brand identification. It's a commodity, and the prices of commodity are constantly falling over time. So you make money by processing it, adding value to it. So you take those oats and you turn them into Cheerios, and then you can charge $4 for that 79 cent, and actually even less than that, a few pennies of oats. And then after a few years, Cheerios become a commodity. Everyone's ripping off your little circles. And so you have to move to the next thing, which are like cereal bars. And now there's cereal straws, that your kids are supposed to suck milk through, and then they eat the straw. It's made out of the cereal material. It's extruded. So you see, every level of further complication gives you some intellectual property, a product no one else has, and the ability to charge a whole lot more for these very cheap raw ingredients. So, and as you make the food more complicated, you need all these chemicals to make it last, to make it taste good, and because, food really isn't designed to last a year on the shelf in a supermarket. And so it takes a lot of chemistry to make that happen.
I was a whole grain baker in Maine, and I would consider the coup to be to get our whole grain organic breads in the schools of Maine for the kids. But we just couldn't compete with Wonder Bread, which could stay on the shelf. I don't know if it was a year. Ours, after a few days, of course, would get moldy because it was alive.
Right. And in fact, one of my tips is don't eat any food that's incapable of rotting. If the food can't rot eventually, there's something wrong.
What is nutritionism?
Nutritionism is the prevailing ideology in the whole world of food. And it's not a science. It is an ideology. And like most ideologies, it is a set of assumptions about how the world works that we're totally unaware of. And nutritionism, there's a few fundamental tenets to it. One is that food is a collection of nutrients, that basically the sum of, food is the sum of the nutrients it contains. The other is that since the nutrient is the key unit, and as ordinary people, bless you, we can't see or taste or feel nutrients. We need experts to help us design our foods and tell us how to eat. Another assumption of nutritionism is that that you can measure these nutrients and you know what they're doing. That we know what cholesterol is and what it does in the body, or what an antioxidant is. And that's a dubious proposition. And the last premise of nutritionism is that the whole point of eating is to advance your physical health. And that's what we go to the store for. That's what we're buying. And that's also a very dubious idea. If you go around the world, people eat for a great many reasons besides, the medicinal reason. I mean, they eat for pleasure, they eat for community and family and identity and all these things. But we've put that aside with this obsession with nutrition. And I basically think it's a pernicious ideology. I mean, I don't think it's really helping us. If there was a trade-off, if looking at food this way made us so much healthier, great. But in fact, since we've been looking at food this way, our health has gotten worse and worse.
Let's talk about the diseases of Western civilization.
The Western diseases, which they were named that about 100 years ago by a medical doctor named Dennis Burkitt, an Englishman, who noted that after the Western diet comes to these countries where he had spent a lot of time in Africa and Asia, a series of Western diseases followed, very predictably: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and a specific set of cancers. And he said, well, they must have this common origin because we keep seeing this pattern. And we've known this for 100 years, that if you eat this Western diet, which is defined basically as, I mean, we all know what the Western diet is, but to reiterate it, it's lots of processed food, lots of refined grain and pure sugar, lots of red meat and processed meats, very little whole grains, very little fresh fruits and vegetables. That's the Western diet. It's the fast food diet. We know it leads to those diseases. About 80% of heart disease, at least as much type 2 diabetes, 33 to 40% cancers, all come out of eating that way. And we know this. And the odd thing is that it doesn't seem to discomfort us that much.
Talk about coming from another culture and coming here. When you specifically talk about sugar, refined wheat, what actually happens in the body?
Well, that's where you see it most directly. When populations that have not been exposed to this kind of food for a long time, we've seen it with Pacific Islanders, if you go to Hawaii, we've seen it with Mexican immigrants coming to America. These are the people who have the most trouble with this diet, and they get fat very quickly and get diabetes very quickly. We hear about this epidemic of diabetes, but it's very much of a class and ethnically based phenomenon, and Hispanics have much more trouble with it. And the reason, or the hypothesis, is that culturally and physically they haven't been dealing with a lot of refined grain, whereas in Europe we've been dealing with refined grain for a couple hundred years.
And what does refined wheat do?
Well, what happens is there was a key invention around the 1860s, which is we developed these steel rollers and porcelain rollers that could grind wheat and corn and other grains really fine and eliminate the germ and the bran. And the reason we wanted to do that was we loved it as white as possible. It would last longer. The rats had less interest in it because it had less nutrients in it. And also you get a kind of a real strong hit of glucose. I mean, basically it digests much quicker as soon as it hits the tongue. I mean, everyone is, if you've ever tasted Wonder Bread, you know how sweet it is. The reason it's sweet is it's so highly refined that as soon as your saliva hits it, it turns to sugar. Whole grains have a whole lot of other nutrients. It once was possible to live by bread alone because a whole grain loaf of bread has all sorts of other nutrients. It has omega-3s, it has, lots of B vitamins. And we remove those when we refine grain. And it's kind of odd and maladaptive that refined grains should be so prestigious since it's so unhealthy. But we've always liked it. And one of the reasons is it stores longer.
We're talking to Michael Pollan. His new book is In Defense of Food and Eater's Manifesto. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Talk about the funding of nutrition science.
Well, nutrition science is very compromised by industry. Organizations like the American Dietetic Association take sponsorship from companies who are eager to be able to make health claims. Not all nutrition science, and there are very large, important studies that are, published or that are supported by the government and are as good as any other medical studies in terms of their cleanness. But there is a lot of corporate nutrition science that's done for the express purpose of developing health claims. This science reliably finds health benefits for whatever is being studied. You take a pomegranate to one of these scientists and they will tell you that it will cure cancer and erectile dysfunction. You take any kind of food that you want. And now it's not surprising because food is good for you, and that all plants have antioxidants. And so, you're bound to find...
Explain what an antioxidant is.
Well, an antioxidant is a chemical compound that plants produce really to protect themselves from free radicals of oxygen that are generated during photosynthesis.